And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. It's my first time in India, so I'm very happy to be here. And I hope you like the talk. So I will talk about the gluon TMDs. So it will be a continuation of what Alessandro said about quark TMDs. But I can anticipate that the theory of gluon TMDs is basically known at the same level of the quark TMDs. But phenomenologically, we are quite some steps behind. I will start talking about the definition of TMDs, and from this it will emerge the intrinsic process dependence of these objects. So also quark TMDs are process dependent, but this has been studied quite a lot, so Alessandro didn't mention it. So we can define gluon TMDs through the gluon correlator, which is this blob described here, depicted here. Such objects describe the transition between a hadron, from a hadron to a gluon. So capital P is the momentum of the incoming hadron, and small p is the momentum of the gluon, which is reabsorbed, and we get again a proton in the or a hadron in general in the final state. So this object here has a very precise definition in terms of QCD operator. It is given by the Fourier transform of hadronic bilinear matrix element, which is given here. The F here are the gluon field strength tensors, and they are calculating different points. So to make this object gauge invariant, we need gauge link. So which are defined as path order exponential of this kind of integrals of gluon fields. And if we work in the fundamental representation, we need two of such objects. So unlike quark TMDs, which depend only on one of these gauge links, the gluon TMDs are more complicated because in general you need two of them. The non-locality of this object is limited to the light front. So this xi here is a 4-vector, and xi plus, the plus component of this vector, is equal to 0. And in general, every path of this gauge link renders this object gauge invariant. And the path that has to be included in this definition depends on the color interaction, so it depends on the process. Depending on the process that we study, we access a different gluon TMD. So the kind of gauge links that I will consider are the ones which are also known from the study of quark TMDs. They are staple-like objects. So I said that xi plus is 0, so we are in the plane here with xi plus equal to 0. And if we study a process like CDs, in which you have only final state interactions, then the path integration will go to plus infinity, then along xi minus, then it will move here in the transverse direction and go back here. So in this case, we have a so-called future pointing gauge link, and I will denote it with a plus. On the other hand, if you have a process like Drell-Yan for quarks, in which I have only initial state interactions, then the gauge link points towards minus infinity, it goes back. So we have a pass pointing gauge link. And we know that these two kind of gauge links give rise to different TMDs. And of course, if we integrate over transverse momentum, xi, which is the conjugate variable of kT, goes to 0, and the gauge link, these two gauge links become the same. That's why we don't bother about them when we have to deal with collinear PDFs. But they are very important when we consider quark TMDs, as here, and especially when we consider gluon TMDs, because we have two objects like this. And in the most general definition of gluon TMDs, we can have any kind of gauge link. For example, now, if I consider a process like I can measure at EIC, which have a collision of electron-proton, and so in elastic scattering, and I observe in a final state a pair of heavy quarks, so QQ bar, or two jets, then I have only final state interactions. So the gauge links that appear in the definition of the gluon TMDs are both future pointing. So I have a plus-plus gluon TMD. On the other hand, if I look at proton-proton collision and I look at color singlet final state, for example, photon-photon production, then my gauge links will be like Drelian, both of them. So I have a minus-minus gauge link. Another kind of distribution in principle. Fortunately, these two can be related to each other. So there is not a multiplication of TMDs. There are some relation I will show. And there are also cases, for example, if I look at production of a photon and a jet in proton-proton inelastic collision, then I can access a TMD which has a future pointing gauge link and a past pointing gauge link. This object cannot be related to the previous two ones, so it's independent. And independently of the gauge link, I can classify the leading twist gluon TMDs in the same way as it has been shown before for quark TMDs. And I can distinguish them according to the polarization of the target here, so the proton. So I'm talking about spin one objects now. For example, the proton can be unpolarized, longitudinally polarized, transversely polarized. And gluons inside can be unpolarized, circularly polarized, linearly polarized. So this is the only difference. Now I have spin one objects like gluons, they have different polarizations. So I use the same notation that Alessandro has used for quark TMDs, but one has to be careful because some of these objects have the same name but have different properties if we compare with quarks. So in gray black background, I show the so-called T-even TMDs, the one that can exist without the presence of initial and final state interactions. And on pink background are the T-odd distributions. So this is the Sieverts function that Alessandro introduced before. This is the same property as the quark Sieverts function. And the one in circles, within circles, are the ones that do not survive, that survive the integration over KT. So in the sense that we have also the collinear analog of this function. So the unpolarized distribution and the helicity distribution. Very important, in an unpolarized proton, I can have distribution of unpolarized gluons, but also distribution of linearly polarized gluons. So this in principle can be different from zero, even if the proton is unpolarized. This other distribution, H1T, H1T perp, are helicity flip distribution. All the ones denoted with H are like that. I will come back to that later. And these are T-odd, but chiral even being gluon, being from gluons. Okay. The difference, also comparing with quarks, is this object they are zero if I integrate over transverse momentum. So there is not an analog of transversity for gluons. So we don't know much about gluon TMDs from experiments. But now we have models, for example, the group of Pavia as a spectator model for gluon TMDs, and Asmita and collaborators also are working in this respect. What I would like to mention is how I can relate the different distribution here. So I just said the unpolarized gluon TMDs are process dependent, and there are two relevant types. They are called Weizsäcker-Williams or WW distribution and dipole distribution. The names are taken from small X community. They realized before us that also unpolarized, for example, gluon distribution come in two types. So when I have plus plus or minus minus gauge links, I have the WW. And in case of T even, distribution like the unpolarized, for example, of the linearly polarized gluons, this distribution, plus plus and minus minus, they have to be the same. The dipole one with the plus and minus gauge link is equal to minus and plus, but these two rows cannot be compared to each other. They are, in principle, are different objects. The property that they share is the integral of a transit momentum of both as to be equal to the unpolarized TMDs. Okay, this is a relation which holds at the partonic level. Of course, we know that if we include renormalization and so on, these integrals are more complicated, but okay. So different processes can probe either these types or a mixture of them. So for example, that's why the EIC is very important, because we can measure a gluon distribution, for example, from this process at RIC. This has been suggested, for example, by Chu and collaborator to look at gamma-gamma production to extract gluon TMDs. And these have minus-minus gauge links. And this distribution is a Weizsäcker-Williams and should be the same as the one that we can measure at EIC by looking at these other two processes. While if we look, this is true for T-even distribution, like the unpolarized. But if I look at the Sievert's function, which is T-odd, then the relation between the two comes with a minus sign. So there is a test of sign change of this gluon Sievert's distribution, which is analog to the one relating about the quark Sievert's distribution between CDs and Drelian. In this case, we have to look at these two different processes. So Drelian is gamma-gamma, and instead of CDs, I have these other two processes. So this is the gauge link structure. So a motivation to look at these processes is also to find if really this expectation is fulfilled by experiments. And then this is the other distribution, the dipole one, which has a plus-minus gauge link structure. Again, at small x, the Weizsäcker-Williams-Sievert's function is suppressed by a factor of x compared to the unpolarized gluon function. But it's not the case for the dipole one. So at small x, this dipole distribution have a nice feature. They become, the one which survive the small x, they become proportional all to the unpolarized one. And in particular, the Sievert's function at small x is a spin-dependent HADRON, it has been found. So one can see at small x as a matrix element of a Wilson loop. And it has the property of being C-odd, that's why HADRON. Okay, I will not go on the small x studies, but I would like to say a few words on the linearly polarized gluons. So gluons inside unpolarized hadrons can be linearly polarized. And this is so if we consider the transit momentum of the gluon with respect to the momentum of the parent hadron. Otherwise, it will be zero. And it is interference between plus one helicity state and minus one helicity state in the complex conjugated diagram here. So diagrammatically is given by a picture of this kind where the helicity of the gluons flips from the right to the left. So it is a T-even object, so it exists in different versions. So the plus plus and minus minus should be the same. And we can probe it looking at heavy quark production, both in EP and PP, and there are many proposals to access this distribution. Also in Higgs production, it can be accessed, and it appears already at leading order if we study Higgs production as small QT. where Qt is the transfer momentum of the Higgs. So in this case, we can apply TMD factorization, and next to this diagram in which the helicities of the gluons are all the same on one side and the other side of the cut, we have to include a diagram in which the helicity flip from one side to the other. And this is a convolution of H1 perp and H1 perp. And this effect is present also in the if you apply collinear factorization, but it will appear as a next to leading order effect, while in the TMD approach, we have it, as I said, already at leading order. Okay, so if one looks at the PT distribution of Higgs boson, for example, then one sees that this modified by the presence of this H1 term. So here, this is a plot from a paper by Shimemi and collaborators. They studied this very recently, okay, quite recently. And they even considered the possibility of having, so to say, CE odd Higgs boson. Okay, now, of course, now we know Higgs boson is C even. So in case of C even scalar particles, we have a plus here. So the transfer momentum distribution is modified adding a term which is a convolution of H1 perp with H1 perp. So it's this green. But you can have orange if you have pseudoscalar particle. And even tried a first, to show a comparison with the data. Now there are more data available for Higgs production and small qt. So I'm sure someone will study again this data, okay, in the TMD approach also for Higgs. What is more interesting is to look at particles which are scalar or pseudoscalar, so behave like the Higgs with respect to this distribution, but at a smaller scale, where the non-perturbative effects are more evident. And the nice feature of looking at C-even quarkonia is that we can have scalar and pseudoscalar quarkonia all together, and so we can compare the spectra of different particles. And we know that if for quarkonia with J equal 2, the effect of linearly polarized gluon is suppressed. So we have this kind of red curve here for KC2, while for KC0 we have to add this R term, which is a convolution of H1 with itself, and we have to subtract for pseudoscalar like eta C. So by comparing the spectra of this different quarkonium state, we can see a difference in the behavior at small qt, and hopefully have access to this distribution. Okay, these are very simple estimates using Gaussian input for the TMDs, which are not known. But after us, there have been studies more refined, in which they look, okay, this was also a leading order calculation, but there is also a next to leading order study, and this was shown that factorization applies at next to leading order. So this kind of quarkonium state using the color singlet model. So quarkonia are produced directly as a CC bar pair at the hard process. Okay, what is new? This was quite old, but now we are also looking at the full cross-section, which the two protons can also be polarized. So we have a double polarized cross-section. And in particular, what is nice, if you look at single spin asymmetries, and this can be measured at a future fixed target LHC experiment, one can see that H1 perp behaves in the same way as it does in the unpolarized case. So with the plus, comes with a plus. If we look at actually, okay, with the opposite sign, let's say, if we look at C even at chi C instead of eta C, okay? So the sign is different. So it's the same pattern that we had for the unpolarized cross-section. So if we compare scalar and pseudoscalar particles. And what I would like to stress before going to EIC is double JPSI production, because we have data here, very recent, from LHCb, and they looked at, they tried to look at gluon TMDs through this process. So we look at inclusive production of two JPSIs. This is accessible at LHC, and the dominant channel is gluon-gluon fusion, so as depicted in these diagrams. And QQ bar contribution are considered to be small, and this be checked numerically that this is the case, even at fixed target energies. And we also checked with the data that we are in a region in which double parto scattering does not contribute or can be separated, and the color singlet model dominates for the production of the double JPSI. So color-rotted contribution are negligible, in particular low PT, where PT psi is the PT of the pair, okay? That's what we are interested in. So we have calculated the cross-section leading order, and it includes already 36 5M diagrams that are shown here. And if we do the calculation, we write the cross-section differential in QT, and we look at the Collins-Soper frame of the JPSI. So the JPSI pair is at rest in this frame. Then we have a similar structure, we have this structure for the cross-section. So we have an angular independent term, which gives access to a convolution of unpolarized gluon TMDs. And then we have a convolution of unpolarized and linearly polarized. This is a cos2 phi. The cos4 phi is a convolution of two linearly polarized gluons, and one can separate all this contribution by taking this objects, so weighting the cross-section with these angles. Okay, then by looking at unpolarized data, we had this first attempt of trying to extract the unpolarized gluon TMD with a very simple Gaussian model with no evolution, since the data are taken all at the same scale, and when data are very large, have very large errors, so okay, it was not difficult to fit this, but okay, this is was a first attempt. But now what came after this, very recently, so some months ago, LHCb took new data in different regions of the double JPSI mass, so between 6 and 7, the black points, the red one between 7 and 9, between 9 and 24, and they used our previous, these are predictions, so this, because after we try to do this extraction, we also include evolution, and we see that the data don't really seem to have this strong dependence on the evolution, or at least is less strong than what we have anticipated. But this is fine, because TMD evolution includes also non-perturbative ingredients, which we didn't have at the time. So I think we can arrange things in order to fit this data in the future, or someone else will do it. But it is true. QCD evolution should make this distribution broader in PT, and we observe this. I mean, not so strongly as our prediction, but data also show that the PT distribution slightly increase with mass. And they even try to measure the cos2 phi and cos4 phi dependencies. They are very small. And so these are the data of the cross-section as a function of the azimuthal angle in the Collins-Soper frame. And the structure is the one that I described before, with the cos2 phi and the cos4 phi. And they fitted these terms A, and C. And from there, you can extract the cos2 phi average and the cos4 phi. And they are very small. Our predictions are consistent with these measurements. Of course, there is a large statistical error. So in general, these results are consistent with 0. But as the author of the paper say, a presence of azimuthal asymmetry at a few % level is still allowed. So there is some hope that there is some linearly polarized gluon hidden in this data. So before going to EIC, of course, what one can do is study now JPSI production and quark-anion production, not in PP, but in EP. And since there will be a talk by Luca after, I will not consider inclusive JPSI production. In order to have a TMD factorization, one needs to include TMD shape functions, which I've ignored in this talk so far. One can have JPSI and a jet, and this will be studied also by Asmita and collaborators. Also, JPSI gamma, for example, also studied. JPSI and the pion will be the talk by Amol later. And also, we can have, instead of quark-anion, just a charm which fragments in a D, and have back-to-back D meson and jet. Also, this will be discussed later. So I will talk about something different, but the idea is the same. So, for example, we can look at DIS, at semi-inclusive deep inelastic scattering, and with the production of two, so a pair charm, anti-charm, for example, BB bar, but at EIC, we look at CC bar. And this pair is to be produced almost back-to-back in a plane which is orthogonal to the exchange virtual photon, which with momentum Q, and the proton P. So K1 perp and K2 perp are the transverse momentum of the CC bar, C and C bar. And so, since they are almost back-to-back, the sum of this vector QT is very small, and the difference is very large. So K perp is the large quantity, and QT is the small one. We are in the so-called correlation limit, where TMD can be applied. So QT must be much smaller than this K perp square. We need two different scales to apply TMD factorization. And doing so at leading order, we can see that the process is dominated by this kind of diagram in which you have gluon photon scattering and the production of CC bar. And we can express the cross-section in terms of this azimuthal angle of this QT, K perp. And also, if you have a transversely polarized proton, we have a phi s, azimuthal angle of ST. And we have an unpolarized cross-section, which is given here, and a polarized one, which depends on phi s. And we have a lot of modulations. So this is very similar to see this process for quarks. We have different modulations, and you can access all of them, and each one of them will probe different convolution of TMDs. The same applies here. So we can separate this contribution and access for the unpolarized cross-section either F1 or H1 perp. And here, okay, we did some very preliminary studies some time ago by looking at two different asymmetries, both of which are sensitive. These are these two here. They are sensitive to H1 perp G. And these asymmetries are in principle measurable, okay? And they depend on the value of Q squared. Here also Q squared, 100 J squared is shown, but it will be difficult to measure at EIC because of statistics. But okay, just to see a different scale and see how these things evolve. And if you look at the spin-dependent part of the cross-section, we have different modulation again, which involve also phi s. And from this, we can extract, for example, the Sieverts function from this sum phi s minus phi t, the red one. The orange one, phi s plus phi t, will be sensitive to H1 over F1. And also, the green one is instead of phi s minus 3 phi t. Okay. And we made a study also of these asymmetries. Here, these are upper bounds, and for these two kind of modulation, the upper bounds are the same, so they can be studied together. And we gave prediction for charm production, even bottom production. Okay, the asymmetries are sizable in principle. Okay, of course, these are upper bounds. Okay, what is simpler from the statistics is to measure double jet production. Also look at jet which are almost back to back. But of course, we have a problem with background. So we have also then gamma star quark into gluon quark, which we don't want if you want to study only gluon TMDs. But then you can go to small x, for example, in order to get rid of the background. In this case, the asymmetries are smaller, but still you can measure them. Okay, this slide is the same. And I just conclude with the final slide saying that this kind of studies, double jet production, has been proposed also by small x people, for example, also in electron nucleus collision, and they always find more or less our conclusions that you can look at this process, you can have a sizable cos to phi asymmetries which can give access to the linearly polarized gluons. And in this study, they show that there's sufficiently small x, and with this cut, you have a small background, and the signal should be enhanced. So I conclude by saying that azimuthal asymmetries for every quark pair production or digest production in semi-inclusive deep elastic scattering would probe the so-called Weizsäcker-Williams type of gluon TMDs. And these kind of processes are similar to semi-inclusive deep elastic scattering have the same role that CD says for the study of quark TMDs. One can look, instead of open heavy quark production, can look at quarkonium. So quarkonium also are good probes for gluon TMDs. There was a first discussion of unpolarized gluon TMDs from LHC data on di-J-psi production, and there are very recent LHCb data, which also look at the polarized gluon TMDs. We have studied asymmetries, usually looking at the positivity bounds for gluon TMDs, trying to find the right kinematic regions which could be explored in future experiments. And so it's very important to compare the results which we got for LHC or from RIC, and that are about proton-proton, with the ones that will come from EIC, because then we can test the process dependence of the gluon Sieverts function and all the other TMDs. And so this kind of studies, there are really an overlap between spin studies, small x physics, and of course TMDs. Thank you very much. Thank you, 1 minute.
Since
Cristian, so of the processes you took into consideration, which ones require in principle the use of shape functions and which ones can be done without, in your opinion?
Well, the ones that involve quarkonium, they all require shape functions. I think the role of shape function will be dominant when we have, as we have checked, and Luca will talk on this. When we have the color octet production mechanism, which is dominant. So at EIC, I think we need to have shape functions when we look at this process here. Inclusive here, but also here, I expect, and all in this, yes. Because we have shown that if the what we have calculated, the perturbative tail of this shape function, it is about color octet 1. So this is this shape function, in a sense, measures or describes the smearing, the PT smearing of the quark-ion with respect to the pair. And this we expect to be larger for color octet CC bar pair compared to color singlet.
Okay, so in principle, so you're not saying that in principle the color singlet channel do not have the shape, but you think that it's not going to be so relevant. But also for the color singlet, in principle, there should be shape function.
Because there is a paper by Miguel in which he studies eta C and its color singlet, but he claims that in theory you have it also for color singlet. But I expect to be less relevant, at least is my feeling.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, it's a nice talk, and I have a very naive question probably. So you showed that in case of gluon, H1T, which is Bohr-Mulder function, probably for the gluon, you showed this is T even.
Yeah.
It's unlike quark distributions.
Exactly.
So do you have any like physical insights for this?
Yes, yes. This is H1 perp, right? We are talking about.
Right.
So this is what we would call, this is what I mentioned, that the name is the same, but the properties can be different. And this is a typical case because the Bohr-Mulders for quarks is T odd. And this is because we have to do with quark, and this object is also chiral odd, right? While for gluons, which are spin 1, you don't have chirality or you don't use it. So this is chiral even, and it is also T even. And the difference is that you can produce these linearly polarized gluons from perturbation theory, starting from collinear gluons, so from unpolarized gluons, okay? By splitting from unpolarized gluons, you can get linearly polarized gluons. But in the case of the Bohr-Mulder function for quarks, this is not the case.
Actually, if I can remember that in case of quark, for unpolarized unpolarized hadron and transversely polarized quarks probably. So if you take this combination, then spree factor will come out to be like T odd. But mathematically, that is fine for the gluon correlator also. But my question is precisely what physics insights you will be having like difference between from quark to gluon?
Okay, I think, yeah, maybe you're saying that, okay, for the quark, you can measure single spin asymmetries.
Right.
While here, since this is a different, is not a T odd object, you have to look at different asymmetries, so azimuthal asymmetries, in which, well, okay, which you don't have polarized, but of course, you also for the quarks, you don't have
right.
polarized target. So, yes, they are really different things. Maybe I will think.
Okay, we can discuss.
Better,
Yeah.
I will think of a better answer.
Thank you.
Later.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Thanks the speaker.
Thank you.